This is the podcast of ENCACT, the European Network on Cultural Management and Policy. In this series, we interview extraordinary professionals from the cultural management and policy community. Join us to hear their stories, the secrets of their success, and their advice for creating innovation by inspiring new policies and practices in the cultural, education, and research sector.
I am Pravali Vangeti, and today I'd like to invite you to listen to the special podcast series produced in the framework of the ENCATC Congress 2024, Culture That Matters, Interdisciplinary Approaches for Sustainable Futures, which was held from 18th to 20th of September in Lecce, Italy. At this occasion, our global community of researchers, academics, cultural practitioners, policymakers, artists, and emerging professionals converged together to explore interdisciplinary approaches for sustainability, a theme that is not just relevant but profoundly transformative for the cultural and creative sectors. So without further ado, let us dive into these conversations right away. In this episode, we will now listen to the keynote from Professor Salvatore Rizzello, full professor of economics and director of ISUFI at the University of Salento. The keynote, titled Embedding Sustainability in Culture, Bias, Nudge, and the Awareness of Human and Organizational Ecological Behavior, set the tone of our Congress, exploring the limitations of traditional rational choice theory and presenting an interdisciplinary approach to understanding human behavior, which emphasizes the role of emotional, cultural, and experiential factors.
Thank you very much for inviting me in this prestigious conference. The main critical aspects of contemporary global economic system can be summarized in two macro phenomena: progressive destruction of environmental resources and growing social inequalities. The proposal to tackle these problems tend to polarize on two antithetical positions, between who suggest public intervention policies for environment and social equity, and who strenuously believe in the market without regulatory interference as a thaumaturgical tool. They believe that the tenacious search for maximizing profits for shareholders continues to remain the North Star for managerial decisions. If consumers demand healthier goods and services to save environmental resources, market dynamics will reward companies that best respond to these needs in terms of greater profits. But can this virtuous process really be achieved without any interference? Or is a regulatory framework that facilitates it necessary? To answer this crucial question, and with the goal to understand how influence human behavior, we need first and deeply explore the micro-foundations of the decision-making process. In standard economic tradition, rationality is the cornerstone of economic behavior, condensed in the unaware individual's capacity to maximize utility function. Alongside the assumption of rational behavior, free individual action is a prerequisite for achieving economic equilibrium. Consumer sovereignty on demand side and optimizing choices on supply side plastically represent human action. Mere mechanics of price condition individual choices and influence their outcomes through the cybernetic action of market, which conveys relevant information towards a selective system of perfect rationality. It's evident that this model effectively counsels free individual action, reducing it to a simple instrument of a broader mechanism which must converge towards a general economic equilibrium with successive approximations. The homogenization of economic agents' rational behavior fits with a globalized economic system, also in terms of standardizations of preferences and demand control. This pan-rationalistic dimension makes free individual action fictitious and completely subordinated to the continuous directing of the system towards the only behavior considered virtuous, the competitive, egoistic, and maximizing one. It should be noted that it's not necessary to refer to levels of absolute rationality. Even the assumption of bounded rationality can ensure the achievement of general equilibrium conditions to computational, mnemonic, and cognitive limitations is guaranteed by the market as a whole. Perfect rationality, which is really not possessed by individuals, is ensured by the system, which, by selection, leads agents to act as if they were indeed perfect rational. An alternative approach to explain decision-making process is offered by cognitive economics, which studies behavior starting from the psychoneurocognitive characteristics of humans. Since Herbert Simon's contributions on bounded rationality and Hayek's on human knowledge, it developed models of choice based on procedural rationality. In short, human behavior, including economic behavior, is the result of an active reworking of our mind in a continuous process of feedback with the environment. External data, such as prices and the qualitative characteristics of a product, are perceived and organized within cognitive frameworks already possessed and which derive from previous experience. This obviously applies to all sorts of stimuli we use to organize our picture of the world. The meaning we acquire, therefore, depends on the specific cultural and institutional context, which informs neurocognitive structures from birth, in giving meanings consistent with the world around. From our previous experience, tacit and explicit, and from the continuous adjustments we implement to make our interpretations coincide with the external environment, natural and social. This process is not strictly causal, but path-dependent. This means that it contains elements capable of modifying behavior even in paths structured by previous experience, but to which have margins for creative actions for individuals or innovative actions by firms. The growing development of experimental economics also showed the fallacy of human rationality, not only in solving complex problems, but also in very simple situations, and as definitively demonstrate how far reality is from an idea of perfect individual or systemic rationality. For over half a century, for example, experimental economics convincingly highlighted that the economic agents systematically violate the principle of rational behavior, predicted by mainstream models, and recognized an active role much more relevant than mere principle of rationality for emotions, imitations, and more generally the context in which choices take place. Compared to standard decision-making model, people make systematic errors, bias, and act by following rules of thumb. Furthermore, Kahneman and Tversky's prospect theory demonstrate that emotions are more important than rationality in decision-making process, later confirmed also by neurologist Antonio Damasio. The alternative models developed by cognitive economics respond more adequately to the realistic behavior of economic agents and are consistent with the characteristics of human mind. As Daniel Kahneman argued, we act by using fast and slow thinking. The former are rapid, automatic, and instinctive. The latter are reflective, intentional, and conscious. We could associate fast thinking with routines, while slow thinking with choices that can be innovative. Therefore, free individual action is expressed in a condition of abstract uncertainty, indefinite outcome of individual choices conditioned by action of others, not perfectly predictable because they are the result of complex, often tacit process of construction of personal knowledge, and within a social order, whose rules emerge from these spontaneous interaction processes. In turn, social rules play the dual role of simplifying the scope in which subjects use their limited capacities and decision-making skills and standardizing, dynamically considering they change over time, the rules of social behavior. Rules of behavior, conventions, customs, organizations and institutions are functional to real individual free action, consistent with cognitive, rational, and emotional actual capacities of economic subjects. The pervasiveness of dependence as a unifying element of these complex processes emerges. The process starts from the construction of personal knowledge and comes to institutions. Path dependence claims that small casual events or small random shocks can alter the course of history or changes processes by determining locking states out of equilibrium maximization conditions or efficiency situations. We are proposing an extension of path dependence analysis traditionally confined to economics of innovation and technological change. In our view, path dependence is more pervasive and characterizes any dynamic process in which each subsequent step is influenced by previous path at a neurobiological, cognitive, genealogical, and social level. It involves learning, the process to give meaning of external stimuli, the formation of opinions, beliefs, moral values, and consequently, action. Referring to the process of acquisition of personal knowledge, this is yet evident in the psychoneurobiological path of giving meaning to new stimuli. The previous successful interpretations already configured in synaptic predisposition of neurons and in the previously tested connected cognitive categories play a fundamental role to which they are reported as familiar. In any recurrent or similar circumstances, the corresponding neurocognitive categories are spontaneously reminded in a path-dependent manner, influenced by the previous subjective path in construction of neurocognitive categories. In turn, these are the result of a path-dependent way that, from the moment of their first appearance, manifests with continuous adjustments of categories to incorporate external environmental and cultural stimuli. Herbert Simon explained how, in highly uncertain and changing context, as well the social environment, we solve problems and acquire knowledge by means of heuristic and putting into practice practiced forms of procedural rationality. This literature, which identifies the source of human diversity in the specific interpretative process of external data, based on genetic and experiential diversity of each, has even the merit of explaining how a social order arises spontaneously. Shortly, we can say that it's based on the selection of information codified group behaviors norms, which in turn are the result of free action of individuals in pursuing their interests of solving problems. The most appropriate to the group are consolidated, the others are removed or declined because disused. Through language or other forms of communication, even tacit, generate rules of conduct, which in turn influence the subjective neurocognitive categories in a mutual relationship of reciprocal condition. Diversity is thus harmonized in social order. Culture is the result of these complex, intertwined processes. Our active ability to give meaning to external stimuli, the unpredictability on outcome of single event, the presence of a probabilistic spectrum of possible states or events, the path-dependent dimension of cognitive and behavioral pathways we call customs. However, the idea to consider customs only as a behavioral regularity doesn't capture the rich interaction between cognition, motivation, and action which results from human mind's predisposition to clarity. Customs are not always compatible with rational behaviors aimed at the efficient achievement of ends. Rather, they emerge from our propensity for symmetry, coherence, analogy, and all those psychological tendencies, including emotions. Even in art, in which human creativity is expressed at highest levels, the introduction of schemes to order chaos is functional to our need for regularity. Perspective, chiaroscuro, contour lines don't actually exist or exist in very unstable and mixed aggregate states. Artists utilize this visual convention to direct regard and help us to give meaning to a complex multitude of stimuli. Since birth, we have a predisposition to expect and continually seek regularity, because uncertainty is a source of stress. Many experiments confirm that in a problematic situation, we find an answer, even negative, instead of tolerating multiple scenarios, although some of these may be far preferable. This response is typically of a narrative type and is not necessarily supported by scientific basis. This aspect is also relevant to explain some rigidity exhibited by consumers and more in general innovation in artworks and its reception. Let's consider, for example, music-based goods by keeping in mind the mechanism of perception and choice described above. The evolution of music depends mainly on two relevant aspects: the artistic creativity of composer and the public's favor. Of course, we must also consider other important aspects, as the role of the famous performance in promoting a composer, the role of patronage, the markets, the publishers, and most recently the role of record companies. But for the limits and the ends of this speech, we concentrate only on composers and public. Some rigidities on demand side in market of music-based goods are linked to the described process of formation of endogenous preferences and derive from the differentiated process of perception of external data, and in reinforcing these paths, a process of learning by consuming that strongly influences tastes and preferences. The more familiar certain harmonies are, the more they are appreciated. Some composers and artists in general follow the trend and become famous and rich during their life by producing artistic goods that meet public favor. Others, a minority, innovate and explore new languages which appear hard and difficult for a large audience. Only the well-educated and cultured person could appreciate. When the new technologies produce music appeared in a period of mature capitalism at the beginning of the last century, phonograph, radio, record player, etc., to reproduce music faithfully, market for musical products was born. In truth, musical scores were also sold in the 19th century, but these were pursued by a cultured and very narrow elite, within which an even narrower circle possessed the ability to appreciate the artistic avant-garde production. When we aimed for mass production, this changed. This happened about a century ago. The new technologies to reproduce and spread music caused a bifurcation Classical music was during overcoming Romanticism and after Impressionism by exploring the daring and hermetic peaks of dodecaphonic music. This kind of language was inaccessible to most people, who instead appreciated tonal music more easily because more familiar. The record industry decidedly focused on products that were more widely distributed among the public, mainly pop music. The more frequent the listening opportunities, the greater the demand for similar records, for an harmonic point of view. In fact, pop music, despite all its variants, is as crystallized in the very popular harmonies of the late Romanticism. Cultural music, on the other hand, continued to explore increasingly sophisticated languages and forms, prerogative of the increasingly restricted audience. This is a clear example of a reciprocal influence between a neurocognitive process of preference formation and interest and the cultural industry. Due to technological change, with the expansions of demand in one case, with the continuous request of similar products in the other. This doesn't mean that in pop music there are not products of high artistic quality or there is not heterogeneity. Indeed, one could give many examples of excellent artists and interpreters. As often happens, technological change also determines innovations in preferences and behaviors. In this case, it was also crucial for aesthetic dimension and artistic production. This is certainly not a phenomenon that can be confined only to the world music, but affects all art in general. It depends on the characteristics of technology. Internet, for example, has had a different impact. It increased the listening opportunities, reducing access costs. It decreased the power of majors in controlling market and also possibilities for independent artists to broaden the range of their proposals on the supply side. In short, industry, by exploiting technologies, directs supply and conditions choices. This depends on the neurocognitive processes illustrated above and mainly determine situations of lock-in, privileging that is more familiar and influencing in turn industrial choices. Technological development, however, can open unexpected opportunities that can trigger real processes of change. As emerged from this example, in the choice of music-based goods, behavior is guided by path-dependent processes of learning by consuming, the new opportunities offered by technologies and complex interaction between them. Many individuals' decision-making processes happen in this way. We call personal culture the sum of these processes. In this framework analysis, more recently, nudge techniques explain how to influence or better to change behavior by affecting the constituent elements of moral, spiritual, and aesthetic personality. It focuses on the ability to select goods and services and on the efficacy of public policies in encouraging virtuous behavior, both on the side of traditional goods and service and on that of cultural goods identified as common goods. The adoption of nudging techniques tends to alter behavior of decision makers in a predictable way, without prohibiting alternative options, particularly in fast-thinking decisions. In practice, it's a matter of intervening in the architecture of choices so that this occur in compliance with the freedom of consumers. In one end, this could be a useful tool to address virtuous human behavior. On the other hand, nudge is criticized for being ineffective in inducing conscious behavior or for being an unacceptable paternalistic tool limiting freedom. A possibility to overcome this criticism is to refer to Nudge Plus, an extended version of Nudge which combines a heuristic and deliberation. This incorporates in decision-making process an element of reflection, the plus, into the delivery of a nudge, and it could be useful to design pro-social interventions that, by preserving individuals' autonomy. A nudge plus is a combination of nudge with an encouragement to think. This modification allows people to reflect on their choices and decide whether they want to follow a certain nudge or not. A nudge plus makes behavioral change more legitimate, ethical, and effective, and belongs to a broader range of tools that increase behavioral action. These are not only relegated to slow thinking, but once consciously adopted, can also influence decisions about faster thinking, thanks to the path-dependent nature of awareness-raising processes. More generally, when one decides to intervene normatively in a complex and delicate area, such as that of explicit protection of social and environmental well-being in productive activity, the use of a nudge plus in particular, can be useful, if not necessary, for an effective implementation of policies that incentivizes the spread benefits. About cultural and landscape goods in particular, the use of nudging techniques can represent a decisive factor. The relatively recent identification of cultural heritage as common goods rather than as traditional public goods represents a fundamental step towards the protection, safeguard, and full enjoyment of one of the essential identity aspects of the human dimension. Like all common goods, they express functional utility for the exercise of human fundamental rights, as well as for the free development of the person. Archaeological, cultural, environmental, and landscape heritage are essential factors for the harmonious development of individuals, not something additional that could be done without. In this regard, and in recent years, emerged as some business companies that combines free entrepreneurial action with regulatory procedures potentially applicable to nudging plus techniques benefit corporations. While traditional companies have the mere objective of making and distributing profits to shareholders, benefits corporations integrate this aim with the more general one of generating positive effects on the environment and the community. The organizational identity of benefit corporations refers to a broader socioeconomic areas and involved the quality of goods and services, the method of implementation, the cultural and social purpose, respect for the environment and the human rights, well-being of those who work, and overall well-being that the entire process determines. In this sense, benefit corporations can play a strategic role in determining processes of change in behavior in almost all sectors, but in particular in that of cultural heritage. Through the explicit recognition of cultural goods as common goods, they can promote the free enjoyment of some material and immaterial goods when they are considered as private. Books, paintings, monuments, archaeological sites, landscapes, etc. Schools, Ministry of Culture, benefit corporation can respectively arrange specific educational paths to stimulate cultural enjoyment for increasingly larger segments of population and to encourage benefit corporation to include cultural assets in their horizon of a contribution to social progress. On this last aspect, we are not referring to the traditional and sometimes laudable forms of sponsorship for the recovery of artistic or landscape assets, but to real entrepreneurial development strategies that see the recovery, protection, and expansion of enjoyment of cultural assets as a strategic factor, which generate positive effects on an environment and community. Yet, if on the education and training side, Nudging techniques can be very effective also for pursuit of these objectives. They don't seem sufficient to trigger processes of this kind within companies. On this last aspect, it's necessary to explicitly include these kinds of commons as goals of benefit corporations in future legislative deliveries. This would allow us to overcome the dichotomy of conflicting interests between supply and demand by permitting legitimate market dynamics not to necessarily condition free artistic evolution, as in the case of music and culture-based good. By summing up, to promote virtuous actions and aware reflection on choices that generate a conscious personal and social cultural identity, we must combine nudging plus techniques with benefit corporations' function. Furthermore, this direction also allows us to suggest what kinds of policies might best enable individual and collective ecological behavior embedded in culture. Beyond different positions on the usefulness of otherwise of regulation, there is now a broad and widespread belief that in production process it's now inevitable to consider environmental limits to development and pay attention to growing social inequalities. For this reason, we must seriously consider the hypothesis that benefit corporations with the proposed improvements could be the only possible way to prosper in a competitive but fair way. Moreover, to adequately understand these complex processes, we must consider the crucial neurocognitive dimension of learning and knowledge acquisition. At the same time, we must consider the powerful path-dependent dynamics that characterize the functioning of our mind and human relationships and how much all this might influence individual and collective ecological behaviors. To pursue this ambitious goal is a great challenge. There is much to do, but with a convinced and correct interdisciplinary approach, relevant results can be achieved. In the different disciplines involved are truly open to dialogue among them with a strong mutual respect, exactly as this prestigious conference is doing. The importance of differentiated perception emerged several times. Let's remember once again that if perception of each of us is unique, each of us perceives the world differently from others. Let's accept with conviction this invitation to humility and tolerance. Thank you for your attention.
Now, let us listen to Christiane Dutch, Professor of Cultural Management at the Hochschule Meersburg University in Germany, as she provides her valuable insights in response to the keynote by Professor Rizzello.
I would like to pick up two ideas from it to answer the question. Firstly, the definition of nudge plus as a kind of nudging with reflection. And secondly, the idea that benefit organizations can play a strategic role when it comes to establishing sustainability. In my view, museums also have this function. I quote, "There is no planet B," end of quotation. We all know that the need to act on climate change is high, but we do not change our behavior or only very selectively. This paradox is caused by various biases, for example, cognitive distortions, which have to do with the fact that we can only imagine climate change to a certain extent, or that we only have limited cognitive capacities. If I were to ask who traveled by plane, by train, or who traveled by car, we would find out that we too, at this conference, have set ourselves the goal of reducing our carbon footprint, but that we have only partially succeeded. In order to intervene in behavior, states can pass laws, mobility providers can pursue pricing policies. This is what the Deutsche Bahn did with the 9 euro ticket. Or institutions can try to influence their target groups. This is what advertising has always done. And this is where nudges comes into play. Concerning institutions, nudging is basically change management. The climate footprints of museums, theaters, and archives show that they also consume enormous resources and produce a large carbon footprint. Like other companies, museums need to relearn the circular economy and encourage people to think about their mobility. This is where corporate nudging comes into play. Corporate nudging means bringing the method of indirectly influencing behavior to the level of the organization. It has 2 target groups, employees and customers or visitors. With regard to employees, the German Museums Association has developed a guideline in which it explains how the conversion to a climate-friendly museum can succeed through planning, staff training, resource conservation, and communication. With its guidelines, the association even nudges museums and their employees. It provides information and frames it through urgency. Apart from that, the association also reminds and rewards successful museums with a certificate for sustainability from 2025 on. So, the association uses several nudges to change the behavior of institutions and their employees. Firstly, framed information. Secondly, group thinking. And third, social norm, which includes the museum's role model with which employees identify. Museums also use corporate nudging to address visitors. Here, it is not just a question of implementing change management within the institution, but also of marketing and familiarizing citizens with the topic of sustainability. This presupposes that they themselves also have climate goals. The museum tries to nudge with classic education programs, but also by encouraging people to change their immediate behavior. An example of this is the Zeppelin Museum in Friedrichshafen on Lake Constance. On its website, the museum emphasizes that it is a sustainable museum. It publishes its current carbon footprint and shows that the biggest problems arise from the disposal of waste and people's mobility. By presenting the problem, the museum combines various options for how the visitor could get to the museum, by bus, train, or car, and ultimately creates an encouragement to change behavior. Those who come by public transport receive a 10% discount on their admission ticket. The museum thus works with the nudge techniques of ethical framing or reframing, information on website, redesign, offer options for mobility, and relief, incentives to change behavior through pricing policy. There would certainly be more ways to nudge. The museum could offer free bicycles, allow the bus ticket to be used as an admission ticket, or offer car sharing. Nevertheless, it is making a start with its measure to change behavior where it has the greatest impact. Nudging, I conclude, is perhaps not the quickest way to establish sustainability and achieve major goals. You could say that it is actually already too late for that. But it can be very helpful when it comes to convincing people and leading to sustainability and sustainable changes in behavior. It's worth a try, I think. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode from the ENCAT Congress 2024 series. You can find episodes addressing other insightful sessions of the Congress as part of the series on the ENCAT website. We truly hope that these podcasts provide you with new perspectives and reinforce your commitment towards co-creating sustainable and conscious cultural and creative sectors. Thank you.
You have been listening to the podcast of ENCACT, the European Network on Cultural Management and Policy. To learn more about us, our activities, and how to become a member, visit encact.org.